Welcome, everyone, to episode 13 of the Mind Viking. I am your host, Eric Engberg. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. And while you're at it, please click on the little bell icon so you're notified anytime a new episode goes live. In this episode, I have as my guest, Mr. Ian Benouis. If you visit Ian's About page on his website, psychedelicmusulman.com, this is some of what you'll find. Ian is a West Point graduate, former Black Hawk helicopter pilot, former U.S. Army officer, and combat veteran who participated in Operation Just Cause in the Republic of Panama. This operation was the largest combat operation in U.S. history, focused directly on the war on drugs, and was the largest special operations deployment ever conducted. Ian grew up in Hawaii in the 1970s, where cannabis was decriminalized and fully integrated into the culture. He has been healing himself of trauma for over 25 years with sacred plants, a spiritual practice, and being a student and practitioner of ethnobotany. Ian was a pharmaceutical representative for Pfizer after he got out of the Army, witnessing firsthand the meteoric rise of SSRIs and synthetic opioids in the early 1990s. Ian is an intellectual property attorney who has been working in the corporate world for over 20 years. He is a political activist in the cannabis and natural plant medicine space nationally and locally in Texas. Now, my brother David, by way of his own spiritual journey, crossed paths with Ian a couple of years ago. David is a different person than who I remember growing up. He has a peace and calm about him now that was never there before. And being the typical nosy little brother, well, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to know just what he was up to, which led me to Ian. So here we are. Ian, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
Good, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we dive in, man, is there anything that you want to add? Maybe something about your bio that, you want to touch on just real quick?
Well, I'm just excited that we're at the point in this whole story that we can see an end to this war on drugs and an opportunity to see what it looks like on the other side.
Yeah. Me too, man. All right, man. So let's dive in. So, Ian, recently you were on a podcast where you said this, describing how Native Americans would reintegrate their warriors back into their tribe after they had come back from war. And I'm paraphrasing a bit, but you said they would fight with the other tribes. Warriors would come back and their tribe would segregate them, make them go through purification rituals and ceremonies to reintegrate them back into the tribe. That bad they did while at war, which was viewed as a necessary evil, well, they didn't want that contaminating their sacred space. And then you went on to say, but we don't have that in our current society. Instead, they're brought back and made into pharmaceutical prisoners of war. So, in doing something to reintegrate our soldiers back into society after suffering the traumas of war seems like a no-brainer. Why do you think that doesn't happen?
Well, I think we're not set up for it. I think the system isn't set up for doing that. And so the pharmaceuticals are an easy way to, there you go, support spiritual bypass by deadening or putting off the inevitability of needing to deal with that stuff to then process it, integrate it, and come out to the other side. So they're just delaying it because there's no medicine that you can give somebody, right? There's no pharmaceutical medicine that you give somebody that's going to fix their service trauma without other people involved in that, right? And those medicines they're giving people, they're not designed to bring people's problems to the forefront for them to process. They're designed to knock them out, limit their experience, limit their expression, so that they don't feel as much pain. So.
Yeah. So, is there any processes? You're a combat veteran. Did you go through anything to kind of to help, kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Acclimate back into society in a healthy manner. Even something surface level, or is it just, hey, you're back into society now, kind of deal with it on your own. If you need help, hey, we got these drugs for you that'll cure this or cure that. Was there anything?
Well, for me, I served in Panama, so not the extended operations, obviously, that Iraq or Afghanistan represented. And so there wasn't any program for after serving in Panama that you did something special to get out on your way out. And the soldiers that are been serving in Iraq and Afghanistan over multiple deployments, they could get help while they're still on active duty as far as if they're having issues. But anytime you would start to identify yourself as that you need help or that you are experiencing symptoms of PTSD, you're starting to compromise your own job and your own service. So people aren't incentivized to do that. And then coming back, the stuff that's being offered is really just perfunctory and not sufficient to any degree to actually help people, fully process back in. So they're really left with the medications that many of them would have started while they were serving, like benzodiazepines, and a lot of people start to get on these medicines while they're actually serving, while they're starting symptoms of PTSD. But they come back and they're still on this cocktail of medicines, which could be 20 or 30 medicines, and they're using alcohol as the cultural, proved inebriant to numb the pain, and they're maybe engaged in high-risk behaviors. And if they don't have the support system, they experience the side effects of these medicines, which they're suicide and suicidal ideations, and then they eventually try to kill themselves. And if they're not successful, then they find cannabis to start to ameliorate some of the symptoms they have, where it can help them sleep at night so they don't have to use benzodiazepines, and some of the pain so they don't have to use synthetic opioids, and muscle relaxants and nausea and whatever else. And so they can use cannabis, and then they use cannabis for a certain amount of time treating the symptoms. And they're not at a point or a way to get to use cannabis in a more shamanic way to maybe do the deeper work, and they need these psychedelics or using cannabis in that psychedelic way to do the deeper work of the trauma and to be able to release that. So these people, they don't have any programs. We don't have any system to do that. They're put on the medicines, and it's more that they've been finding their way to these natural ways and natural medicines after trying all the other, surviving the system and trying everything that the system gave to them to help them get out, which includes talk therapy and all that, and that's supportive, but it doesn't, with that in pharmaceuticals, doesn't reintegrate people back into society.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't even think of was, and I guess it makes sense. is that, I guess, yeah, you know, you're a soldier. I guess you're kind of trained to be tough and resilient. And I could see some soldiers not wanting to ask for help. You know, they're, you know, like you were saying, there's a stigma, and you know, you're kind of jeopardizing your, you know, your position there, by saying, hey, I'm in trouble. You know, I suffered some traumas over there, and I need help. That is kind of, would you say, almost frowned upon?
Well, it's just discouraged by the nature of the system. No one in the military wants to be on profile, which basically means you have some sort of medical limitation, which is preventing you from doing your job. Okay. Yeah. Here's how pervasive it was. I went to West Point with the fracture in my hand, and they x-rayed and told me you got a fracture in my hand. They're like, you can go on profile during beast barracks, your basic training, and get some kind of special treatment and not have to do things, or you can, you know, deal with it. And I'm like, oh, I definitely want to deal with it, because who wants to be the person, I just showed up here and now I'm gonna stand around and
Yeah.
you know, not have to do this. So if you're serving right in theater, you're deployed where there's combat operations going on. No one wants to basically say, hey, I'm showing up for work and I can't do my job. I need to get medical attention. And then people are like, well, that person shouldn't come out and play with us today because they're not like a professional athlete,
Yeah.
fully ready to go. And so, and then if you are trying to stay in for your retirement, you want to fully get that, rather than saying, oh, now you have some medical limitation that means you can't do your job anymore permanently, and now you're not going to get to stay in towards your retirement, and then you're going to potentially get some sort of medical discharge, which is always going to be conditional on if we're going to give it, how much, how long, do we take it away when you get better? So you see what I'm saying? People, any exposure of weakness in health compromises people's security to their livelihood, their retirement, their career, all that. So
Yeah. I would imagine if I was in that situation, I probably wouldn't say anything. Yeah.
well, it's just more like any system that has retirement, you know, kind of police, military, teachers. There's you know what I'm saying, there's going to be incentives and motivations people have in doing their job because of that system it's set up. So no one in the military wants to be looked at as sick, because it's like you're not gonna make as much money as the person who's healthy, and people are going to look down at you because maybe in an office, you know, in a job where your whole condition doesn't matter to you during your job. In the military, if you're like not 100%, maybe the guy next to you is going to die because you're not 100%. Whereas in sports, you're not going to win the game. Work, you know, you lose the deal. In the military, you know, people die.
Yeah.
Not that doesn't happen in the civilian world, but it's just
right.
more so.
Yeah, much more on the line. Yeah. Well, hey, man, in that same podcast, and you just touched on this, you said this, that vets come back with PTSD, they self-medicate with alcohol, pills, they attempt suicide, they don't succeed, they find cannabis, they get off all the meds, it helps treat the symptoms of PTSD, but then they have to deal with all of the underlying trauma behind it. And that's when they need the deeper medicine. So, Ian, in the intro, when I read from your about page, you know, it's stated that you've been healing yourself of past trauma for over 25 years. And again, referring back to that same podcast, you went into detail about some of these past traumas. One trauma, which you described as especially traumatic took place when you were in the second or third grade. You were sexually abused by an older boy in your own home. So, man, would you mind sharing with the audience how a ceremony using, the deeper medicine that you referred to, how that helped you deal, or heal from this trauma, and maybe explain what those deeper medicines were?
Sure. Let's see. So this was about over 5 years ago. Is that right? Yeah. And I was doing ayahuasca. It was the second night of a 3-day ceremony. And the first day was a lot of healing stuff in my body, aka hospital. And the next day, I was getting a lot of this healing around my heart, polishing it, cleaning it, blowing it up into a million pieces, and then putting it back together, and then more of the same over and over again. And once that process felt complete to me, I said to myself out loud, or I mean, not out loud, but I said to myself inside of myself to the medicine, I'm like, let's take this out for a ride. Let's take this place that I'm in right now that feels like, my heart's really clean and open to and see what happens. And immediately I went to this episodic memory of myself being sexually assaulted by this boy in our neighborhood, and like you said, in my parents' house, in my house. And it was like a holographic experience. And so first I'm like, is this real? Is this time travel? And just trying to sort it all out of what was occurring. And once I understood what I could, see, what I could experience, I had all this compassion for this person, this version, me, this, that's experiencing this. And after allowing myself to experience that, then my attention naturally began to shift towards this other person through, empathy and through compassion of what's the reason that you're doing this, and not in a challenging, but just like what's behind, what's part of, what's the bigger thing to why this is going on. And in opening myself up to that empathy or compassion or concern or consideration, the whole thing just like evaporated away. The whole like episodic memory, the whole like hologram just dissolved, melted, evaporated. And I was like, wow, okay. So that was
yeah,
that was about it.
So you actually through the medicine, and this was on that day you had taken ayahuasca. Can you, for someone who's watching, has no idea, maybe just has heard that term, just kind of quickly explain, some of the medicines aside from ayahuasca that were part of this, healing ceremony?
Yeah, it was ayahuasca, and which is a combination of DMT from Psychotria viridis, the chacruna plant, which is normally orally not active, but is made orally active by the ayahuasca vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, which is also called ayahuasca, is the vine, and the brew itself are the two components, and the MAOIs, the beta carbolines in the ayahuasca vine, allow the DMT to be absorbed into the bloodstream and experienced over a course of 3 to 6 hours different as compared to if you were to vaporize the same DMT. It would experience the half-life of 12 to 18 minutes because the medicine is orally is absorbed directly into your bloodstream without having to go into your stomach. So.
Okay.
So what? Yeah. So does that kind of answer your question about what?
Yeah. So the primary medicine was the ayahuasca. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Orally activated DMT.
Okay. Yeah. So man, in 2016, you organized a trip to Peru for 6 veterans suffering from PTSD. There they participated in a shaman-guided 10-day dieta, which included ayahuasca and other plant medicines. The trip and parts of the ceremony were then made into a feature-length film entitled Soldiers of the Vine. So for those who maybe haven't seen the film, I've watched the film, but for those who haven't, can you share some of what these veterans experienced in terms of healing while on the medicine?
Sure. So we participated in a traditional Peruvian, and other places and cultures and countries have similar concepts, but a 10-day dieta, where during that dieta, our diet was controlled during the entire time. And then how we interacted with each other was controlled, and how we were living and how we were interacting and communication and all that kind of stuff. And then we consumed ayahuasca 3 times during those 10 days in nighttime ceremonies, and used other medicines, more like you could call maybe tonic type medicines, over the course of a couple days, taking them repeatedly. We started with the tobacco purge. We then did a Makura cleanse. Then each of us started on a certain plant that we switched to halfway through the remainder to another plant. And then we also did these 3 ayahuasca ceremonies. And then if there were other specific conditions or issues that someone had, then any of the 3 brothers we basically was the one brother, but would prescribe other plants or if people needed them.
Yeah. So I mean, is there a way to even describe what an ayahuasca experience is like? I mean, for someone who, maybe is kind of having a hard time wrapping their mind around, something like this. I mean, what is it about ayahuasca and some of these other plant medicines that, someone maybe wouldn't be able to get, or a state of mind they wouldn't be able to achieve just through, a normal counseling session? Or why have you found them to be so effective? Yeah, maybe that should be my question.
Sure. Well, I think, or how do they work, and kind of maybe some my personal perspective, philosophy, concept for how they work is, our bodies make these neurotransmitters, neurohormones, neuromodulators inside of ourselves. And then these animals and plants contain the same medicines or things that are very similar. And so a human being takes these medicines, and as an example would be DMT or 5-MeO-DMT that your body makes, your pineal gland makes, your lungs make DMT, your retinas make 5-MeO-DMT, your body makes these, right? And so the medicines add to the amount of those medicines that are in your body, focusing your attention on what needs consideration inside of yourself at a more enhanced level of power because of the amount of those medicines that are in there, and there's no place to go. So if you're not exercising your DMT and doing your work on a regular basis through your emotional experience day to day, you can take ayahuasca where it shuts down your ability to break DMT. And then you soak in more DMT than you normally have, and you learn to operate your own DMT levers and then the levers of the other medicines that are all similar to these, like serotonin and, you know, all these other chemicals in the body. So the medicines from the outside help you to get better control over your own natural systems of medicine operation inside of yourself. And if people are whatever repressing or limiting the operation of those systems, right, then the medicine gets in there, and I know that it's going to focus yourself on the thing that's most needs your attention. And so that's why it's difficult to describe an ayahuasca experience to different people or a DMT experience, is because some people may have, you know, alien landscapes and machine elves and self-dribbling basketballs and whatever other cultural, you know, artifacts are preceded for people to experience. Or some people say, I didn't see anything, you know, and it was just all, you know, heart oriented or something else. It's your own medicine giving you more of it to, right, allow you to do with it what's most important for you and your healing and your personal attention.
Yeah.
And so, so with ayahuasca, it heightens your senses, it down regulates your default mode network, it enhances all your, you know, sensory data, and then the music provides an entrainment mechanism for you to focus on. So it's kind of like, you know, energetic peristalsis. You get on the medicine, you're soaking in it, and the music's like dum 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 dum, you know, what, right? And it's basically, you know, work that work that body, work that process, you know what I mean? And you sit there, and the medicine is helping to push you along, whether that's a peyote meeting or an ayahuasca ceremony, whatever. It's all the same process of and then the entrainment of the music brings people together in synchrony, right, where their energy are more aligned, and then it also, you know, holds the time and the space for it. And so, so
what role does the shaman play in the ceremony, and how important is it to have you know, a good, knowledgeable, experienced shaman overseeing the ceremony?
Sure. Well, as we all know, that term's really loaded, right? So if we said, what would be a good term for a person who's, you know, whatever you like, practitioner, facilitator, you know, ceremony leader, I think it's important to have someone who's leading ceremony and is also providing the support of the healing process, both before and after. And that doesn't always have to be the same person, right? It can be one and the same person, or more than one. But it's that the person. I was a helicopter pilot, and in a Black Hawk helicopter, you had two pilots, and it required two pilots to fly. And there was, you know, always someone who was on the controls. There was never any question of who was flying the aircraft. And so that's energetically what those people or persons are doing, is they're holding the energetic space for the ceremony to occur from start to finish, and take people off, as it were, or take people out, take people in, and all go do it safely as a group. And then everybody comes back home safely as a group. And and then those persons, you know, should, in my personal opinion, and most, it's general agreement, you know, they should be on the medicine and have lots of experience with it before they've ever gotten around to sharing it with anyone else. And I think ultimately separate from using the word shaman, but use maybe at least the word healer, is that we can all say, that's what makes someone a healer, is if you heal yourself. And then if you heal yourself, and then you can share the healing of how you healed yourself and that with other people, then you're sharing yourself as a healer. But yes, someone who's ultimately, whatever the title, name, role is it's taking responsibility for the ceremony and the energetic space, and then people's, responsibility, whether it's done by someone else or them after the ceremony, right? Because once somebody says, I'm going to take the medicine, then the process starts to work before they actually are ever in the actual ceremony. And then the process after, it's just someone's taking energetic responsibility for that person from start to finish. And I think that's more of the greatest importance over, what titles and roles we're using to describe it.
Yeah. So what just real quick, what were some of the healing breakthroughs, going back to Soldiers of the Vine, again, for those that haven't seen the film, that you experienced, some of these veterans suffering from PTSD, experienced when they were there?
A big thread of all this work is that childhood trauma is the biggest correlator to experiencing any kind of PTSD of any sort, military service induced or otherwise, as an adult. And really the breakthroughs were a lot of breakthroughs around self-forgiveness, where people learned that they had the power inside themselves and their own divine nature to allow for forgiveness. And so people from war experiences of guilt of killing people, guilt of seeing their friends die, guilt of why did I die? Why did that person die versus me? Did I do something different, wrong, whatever that, I'm saying, induced or caused, whatever all. And just, I think just a lot more family stuff. It's like the underlying things that, people hadn't sorted, that war only compounded. So loss of family members, growing up.
And I know this is not true of, all servicemen or women, but I would say the majority that I've known in my life, they when they joined the military, either they didn't feel like they had any other options, or, were trying to get away from something, and this was a quick answer, join the military, I'll get 3 squares a day, housing, all of that. So if you're already going into the service with a lot of trauma, and then you experience more trauma when you're there, you got to be pretty not in a good place when you get out, right?
Yeah. And if you think about it in kind of an infectious disease model, which these days actually everyone's into those sort of things. 25% of the people serving who served in Iraq and Afghanistan experienced the symptoms of PTSD. So if you have childhood trauma and you have a less than ideal support system for yourself, and then you're saying like that makes it more likely, you might join, right? Because you have a higher risk tolerance, you see less possibilities in a more, standard model. Then you go and join, and then you experience more trauma. You're more likely to contract the PTSD from, going to combat if you already had a poor support system and trauma to begin with. And then especially if you come back and you don't do anything to fix that, then it becomes terminal, because people get on these meds, and eventually the suicide and suicidal ideation and the addiction and everything else, and traumatic brain injury just becomes a dead end. And yeah, so
yeah. So hey, man. So drugs, substances, and certain chemicals used to make drugs have been classified into 5 distinct categories or schedules, depending upon the drug's acceptable medical use and the drug's abuse and dependency potential. Those drugs.
So they say. Yeah. So they say.
They say. Yeah. So those drugs, substances, or chemicals with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential of abuse are classified Schedule 1. A few examples of current Schedule 1 drugs are cannabis, marijuana, LSD, and MDMA or ecstasy. But man, the tide seems to be turning on many of these drugs. Many states have fully legalized cannabis. MDMA has shown promise in studies of treating PTSD in combat veterans, and psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin are now being seen by psychiatrists as valuable tools when combined with psychotherapy. So, man, what do you see the next 1 to maybe 5 years bringing in terms of the legalization on a federal level of some of these drugs?
Sure. As you pointed out, we've got the schedule. All these medicines are on it, all these natural medicines. DMT was put on the schedule in 64 and then discovered in the human body in 65. So it's just, it's not up to date at all.
And would you just touch on that real quick, Ian? So this was something that you told me that blew my mind away. So right now there are drugs that are considered or chemicals that are substances that are considered illegal that are in our own human body, right? DMT being, yeah, that's just nuts.
Yes, every single human being in the United States, citizen, resident, otherwise, is guilty of a felony of possessing at least 2 Schedule 1 substances, aka 5-MeO-DMT and DMT, which our bodies naturally make. And it's just that legal fiction is unsustainable. And it's funny because it's not just possession, it's manufacture. So it's 2 felony counts of 2 different substances. We're possessing it with an intent to use, and we're manufacturing it because our bodies make it. And every mammal makes those same substances, you know. And then if you start to go down into the other plant medicines, they all either are in our bodies or share the same structure of a very closely aligned molecule that's in our bodies. And that's how the stuff works. Otherwise, it wouldn't work.
Yeah. That's nuts. Yeah. So, man, do you?
So the next 4 years, I see what happening is you have psilocybin and MDMA that have been given this, exceptional designation by the FDA. Shown incredible promise already, you know, which is not obviously a surprise for anyone inside the medicine circle. And now, when they're in the phase 3 of their clinical trials, and $30 million has been raised to have the final, payment to complete those trials, so that those 2 medicines are on track to be, FDA approved medicines in the next 1 or 2 years. Under the prescription of a medical professional. And so it used to be that THC, cannabis, the whole plant was all off limits, basically. And then the Hemp Farm Bill created this thing called 0.3% THC called hemp. And now it's the sort of carving off slowly of the pieces of, this fully illegal plant. And now you got CBD, you've got, lower percentage THC that's no longer considered marijuana. Cannabis is considered hemp. And so it's my belief and opinion that once any one of these things comes off the schedule, and that means comes off Schedule 1, which says it's highly addictive and it has no medical value, any medicine that's FDA approved cannot be Schedule 1, because the FDA is saying that it has medical value. It can still be dangerous, but you can't have it stay on Schedule 1.
Okay. Yeah.
So any drug then again that the FDA approves has to at least go to Schedule 2 or something lower, or completely come off. And so once one of these medicines comes off, then it's going to be impossible for the government to deny that it's unconstitutional for any of the other ones to be on there. And you have the presidential both politics and power of this is all under the DEA, which is under the executive branch. So President Trump right now, whoever's president next cycle, under their own order, could eliminate the entire schedule with one stroke of the pen, could change the schedule of a particular medicine, could take a particular medicine off. So yes, right now, President Trump has the power to free weed if he so chose. By the stroke of the pen. So what I think is going to happen in the next term is that all these medicines are going to be deregulated. So at the federal level, you'll have descheduling, rescheduling, still attempts of control by pharmaceuticals and doctors, and more the medical institutions of trying to control who can have access to the medicines. And then from the bottom up, you'll have decrim at the state, at the city levels, at the state levels. You'll have right grow, where people will be growing these things. At the state levels, you'll have decrim initiatives and expungement and that kind of stuff. So you just have this whole, whatever you like, sandwich or artifice, where all these things are going to be working together. And it's just the next 4 years is really the drug war coming to an end, and then that normalizing throughout the rest of the planet. So,
yeah. So, and that's exciting to hear. I was online and I pulled up one article where it kind of gave a map of all the different states where cannabis was fully legalized, medical, recreational, all that. Well, I think recreational actually fell under just fully legalized. And Texas was considered decriminalized. So what? Yeah. So yeah, I thought it was still illegal in Texas.
Well, so yeah, you're kind of talking about these different levels of government and administration. So in Texas, cannabis flower is decriminalized in the major metro areas, and basically, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston. It's still technically federally illegal, right? Unless it's hemp. And it's still illegal in Texas. So it's very important. This is one of the next battles, is the difference between decriminalization, aka decrim, and legalization or descheduling or right to grow. Because I'm just going to say, people are already promising decrim as like the most nebulous kind of thing. I don't. Decrim movements and decrim nature, all that stuff's real, but when politicians start saying decrim, there's, that can't be trusted, because if they don't tell you what the rules are, then So basically, you're going to have we're trying to go back to what are we trying to figure out about decrim?
Yeah. So the map that I saw, Texas was listed as a state that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Cannabis has been decriminalized.
So for Texas, you have some decrim going on. At the same time, it's federally, descheduled. And then Texas at the state level, we're still trying to get a medical program that people can actually use. Right now, there's no medical program for THC. It's the flower that doesn't contain more than 0.5% THC. So if you have epilepsy, basically you could get access to the program, which it's really not a medical program. That's the third piece, right? That's the state level, separate from the decrim, so you're not getting arrested for it, but that doesn't protect you as a medical patient. And then separate from federal things that are happening, but still federally it's illegal. So Texas, the next session is in 2021, basically months away. And yeah, we had no program to we had a CBD program that helped, less than 1,000 people to from 0.3% THC to 0.5% THC. That's not really helping anybody. And then we'll find out what's going to happen in Texas. And I think it's really, the one. It's the final chapter of the big states in getting a medical program in the United States. So
yeah,
so it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah. Say that again. So what's the step before that? Is it coming off of the Schedule 1?
No, separate from that at a federal level, there's no medical program in Texas for cannabis. So if you're a medical patient and you need any kind of THC, that flower that has above 0.5% THC,
yeah,
you're basically violating federal law, you're violating Texas law, and depending on the municipality you live in, you have issues with, are you violating their decrim statutes, and can they still decide to enforce it? So,
yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
right on.
Well, hey, man, that's a lot to ingest. But man, I think that's where we'll leave it, man. I want to thank you for your time today, Ian. Definitely want to thank you for your service and also for looking out for our veterans, man. My stepdad, who pretty much raised me, he was a World War II vet. I grew up around vets, and yeah, my stepdad, now that I hadn't even thought about this, he had a whole drawer full of medication that was prescribed, to him by the VA. And, he was kind of always in pain, to a point where sometimes, he was having to use a cane or, in a wheelchair. Yeah, I don't know if he would have participated in some plant, medicine therapy, but yeah, it would have been neat to at least for him to have options, Yeah. So, all right, brother. Well, hey, man, thank you so much, Ian, and we'll catch you on the flip side, man.
All right, brother. Really appreciate you. Peace.
Okay. See ya.